You know, they say the most dangerous people in the world aren't the guys running cartels or the shadow brokers toppling governments, because at least those guys have a code, a logic to their madness. But if you want to see true, unhinged chaos, you just need to move to the suburbs and meet a woman named Linda Prentice. I was on my knees on the asphalt, the gravel digging into my suit pants, rain starting to drizzle out of a grey Washington sky, and there she was, standing over me like she'd just conquered a small nation, waving a sandwich bag filled with white powder in the air while her rent-a-cops, Biff and Gary, looked at me with this mix of fear and adrenaline, probably because they'd never actually detained anyone. Who wasn't a teenager skateboarding on the sidewalk? I knew it. Linda shrieked, her voice cracking like a whip across the cul-de-sac, bouncing off the perfectly manicured hedges of Willow Creek. I knew he was bringing filth into this community. Look at this. Everyone look at this. Drugs right here in the glove box. And honestly, in that moment, looking up at her manic eyes and that terrible floral blouse that cost more than my first car, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel fear. I just felt this profound, exhausting sense of irony because she had absolutely no idea that the man she was trying to frame for possession of maybe 2 ounces of baking soda or whatever she'd crushed up in her kitchen was currently the Director of Intelligence for the Department of Homeland Security. But let's rewind a bit, because you need to understand the architecture of this nightmare. You need to understand that I didn't buy this house in Willow Creek to cause trouble. I bought it because after 25 years of counterterrorism and sleeping in safe houses, from Beirut to Key Wivey, I promised my wife, Sarah, that we would have a garden, a porch, and a life where the biggest threat was aphids on the roses. We moved in 6 months ago, and almost immediately, I appeared on Linda's radar, not because I was loud or messy, but because I was quiet, and to a woman like Linda, who ran the HOA like it was her own personal fiefdom, silence is suspicious. Silence means you're hiding something, or worse, it means you don't acknowledge her power. It started small, the way it always does with these suburban tyrants. First it was a letter in the mailbox about my trash cans being out at 6 p.m., when the bylaws clearly stated 5:30 p.m. Then it was a fine for the shade of mulch we used. Apparently midnight black was too aggressive for the neighborhood aesthetic. And then came the drone. I was in the backyard one Saturday, sanding down an old oak table, just trying to decompress after a week of briefing the Joint Chiefs on cybersecurity threats in the Pacific, when I heard that annoying buzz, and I looked up to see a camera drone hovering 10 feet above my fence line. Piloting it from her driveway 3 houses down was Linda, clipboard in hand, checking for unauthorized landscaping. I walked over there, calm, always calm, and I said, "Linda, you're violating federal airspace regulations and invading my privacy. Bring it down." And she just looked at me with that smug, tight-lipped smile that says I own you, and replied, "The HOA bylaws supersede your privacy, Marcus. If you have nothing to hide, you shouldn't mind." And right then, I knew this wasn't about rules. This was about dominance. See, Linda wasn't just the HOA president. She was a failed local councilwoman who had funneled all her ambition and bitterness into making sure nobody in Willow Creek breathed without her permission. And she had her enforcers, Biff and Gary, to guys who washed out of the police academy and compensated for it by wearing tactical vests to patrol a neighborhood where the average crime was a squirrel stealing a bird feeder. The escalation hit a boiling point when Sarah, my wife, decided to plant hydrangeas along the front walk, beautiful blue ones, and came home one day to find them ripped out by the roots, lying on the sidewalk like garbage, with a citation staked into the dirt. Non-native flora violation, $500 fine. Sarah cried that night, not because of the money, but because of the cruelty, the sheer malice of it. And that was the moment I stopped seeing Linda as a nuisance and started seeing her as a target. Not a target for violence, obviously, but a target for the kind of dismantle and destroy operation I'd been running on foreign soil for decades. So I told Sarah, "Don't worry, honey, let her push, let her think she's winning." Because when people like Linda get confident, They get sloppy, and boy, did she get sloppy. It was a Tuesday. I was driving home from the airfield, exhausted, tie loosened, just wanting a scotch and a shower, when I turned onto my street and saw the blockade Linda had actually set up orange cones across the road, and Biff and Gary were standing there with flashlights, waving me down like it was a DUI checkpoint. I rolled down the window, the engine of my sedan purring, and Linda marched up, flanked by neighbors she had summoned via the community text chain. Phones out, recording, eager for the show. Step out of the vehicle. Marcus, she commanded, her voice trembling with excitement. We've heard reports of suspicious activity involving this car, drug trafficking to be precise. I almost laughed. I really did, because the idea was so absurd. But I saw the cameras. I saw the neighbors watching the Johnsons, the Millers people who were terrified of her, waiting to see if I would crumble. So I played the game. I put the car in park, turned off the engine, and stepped out, hands raised, saying, Linda, you have no legal authority to search this vehicle. You're a civilian, and this is harassment. The bylaws allow for security inspections to protect the community. She yelled, playing to the crowd, search it, boys. Biff shoved me against the hood harder than he needed to and zip-tied my hands behind my back, which was technically assault and kidnapping. But I let it happen, my mind already cataloguing the charges, filing away the evidence, calculating the response time for the panic button I had pressed on my key fob. The moment I saw the cones, they tore through my car, throwing my gym bag on the wet ground, ripping out the floor mats, and then, with the theatrical timing of a bad soap opera, Linda leaned into the passenger side and popped back out holding that baggie. That damn baggie she had clearly pawned from her pocket. Gotcha, she screamed, creating that moment I described earlier, the rain, the gravel, the humiliation. You're finished, Marcus. She was pacing now, circling me like a shark in a pantsuit. I'm going to have you evicted, arrested and ruined. I bet you don't even have a job, do you? Just a drug runner pretending to be a decent neighbor. I looked at her, water dripping down my nose, and I spoke low and steady, Linda. I'm going to give you one chance to put that back, uncuff me and walk away, because if you don't, you're going to open a door you cannot close. She laughed, a shrill, ugly sound, and leaned down into my face, her breath smelling of coffee and mints, or what? You'll call your lawyer. I am the law here, Marcus. Look around. Nobody is coming to save you. But she was wrong, because someone was coming. And they weren't coming to save me, they were coming to neutralize a threat to a federal asset. I could hear it before they did. The low thrumming sound in the distance, distinct from the wind. The sound of a heavy-lift helicopter cutting through the cloud layer. And the sudden screech of tires not from the entrance of the neighborhood, but from the service road behind the tree line. Linda, I said, my voice dropping an octave, losing all the neighborly warmth, shifting into the tone I used when interrogating defectors. Reach into my jacket pocket, the left inside one. I'm not touching your filth, she spat. Do it, I commanded. And for the first time she flinched. Something in my eyes unsettled her, a coldness she hadn't seen before. So she reached in, her hand trembling slightly, and pulled out my wallet. Open it, I said. She flipped it open, expecting a driver's license, maybe a credit card, but instead, the light from Gary's flashlight caught the gold shield and the laminated ID card, with the diagonal red clearance stripe that said Department of Homeland Security, Level 5 clearance, Director of Intelligence. The color didn't just drain from her face. It vanished, leaving her looking gray and pasty in the street light, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. This is fake, she stammered, looking at Biff. He bought this online. It's a prop. Read the back, Linda, I whispered. The number to the command center is right there. But she didn't have time to dial, because suddenly the cul-de-sac was flooded with blinding white light, not from street lamps, but from the floodlights of 3 black armored SUVs that had just mounted the curb, tearing up her precious pristine lawn, and from the sky. The chop 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 of rotors became deafening as a chopper hovered low enough to shake the shingles. Off her roof, doors flew open, and this wasn't the local sheriff's department. This was my detail, 6 agents in full tactical gear, weapons drawn but disciplined, moving with a fluid, terrifying speed that made Biff and Gary drop their flashlights and raise their hands. Before a single word was shouted, my second in command, Agent Harrow, a man who looks like he was carved out of granite, stepped out of the lead vehicle, ignored the screaming neighbors, ignored the terrified rent-a-cops, and walked straight to me, pulling a knife to slice the zip ties off my wrists in one smooth motion. "Director," Harrow said, handing me my jacket, "we received a distress signal. Are you compromised?" I rubbed my wrists, feeling the blood flow back, and turned to look at Linda, who was now holding the baggie of white powder like it was a live grenade. She didn't know how to throw. "I'm secure, Harrow," I said, fixing my cuffs. "But we have a situation involving the framing of a federal officer, possession of a controlled substance, and kidnapping." Linda dropped the baggie. It hit the puddle with a splash. "No, wait. I found this. I was just doing my job. He's the criminal." I walked over to her, stepping into her personal space, towering over her now that I was off my knees. "Linda, you planted evidence on a federal official. Do you have any idea how many felonies you just committed in the span of 5 minutes? I'm the HOA president," she whispered, as if that title still held any magic in the face of the federal government. "And I'm the guy who hunts terrorists," I said softly. "So let's see whose authority holds up in court." Harrow nodded to the team. "Secure them." Seeing Linda Prentice in handcuffs was an image that burned itself into the retina of every single person standing on that cul-de-sac, and I have to be honest, it was a complicated feeling, part righteous vindication, part pity, because watching someone's entire reality fracture in real time is heavy, even if they deserve it. Biff and Gary, the 2 tough guys who had been ready to beat me down with batons 5 minutes earlier, were now face down in the grass, sobbing, actually sobbing, begging the agents not to hurt them, spilling their guts before anyone had even read them their rights, shouting, "She told us to do it. She paid us extra," which, let's be real, is exactly the kind of loyalty you get when you hire your security from a Craigslist ad. But Linda, she didn't cry, not at first. She just stood there as the agent tightened the cuffs, her face this mask of shock and indignation, muttering, "You can't do this. I know people. I'm the president," like she was waiting for a director to yell cut so she could file a complaint with the studio. Harrow, my second in command, walked over with a forensic evidence bag, a real one, not a sandwich baggie, and carefully picked up the packet of white powder she'd dropped in the puddle. "Sir," Harrow said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear, "we'll run this for prints." But given she was waving it around without gloves, I'm guessing we'll get a perfect match for Mrs. Prentice. Linda's head snapped up. "No, he planted it. It's his." And that was when Mrs. Higgins, this sweet 80-year-old lady who lived 2 doors down and usually only came outside to water her petunias, stepped forward with her iPhone held high, her hand shaking just a little bit. "Actually, Linda," Mrs. Higgins said, her voice thin but clear as a bell, "I have it right here on video. I started recording when you pulled the bag out of your pocket, dear. You didn't even try to hide it. That was the moment the dam broke. You could feel the air change in the neighborhood. The fear that had suffocated these people for years just evaporated, replaced by this collective realization that the emperor wasn't just naked. She was going to federal prison. We didn't just book her for the drugs or the framing. Oh no, see? When the FBI looks into you, we look into everything. We don't just skim the surface. We dredge the lake. Turns out, Linda's little reign of terror wasn't just about power. It was about profit. Because once we subpoenaed the HOAS financial records, we found the holes big, gaping. 6-figure holes. She had been funneling HOA dues into a shell company for consulting fees, paying Biff and Gary under the table while pocketing the difference. She'd effectively stolen over $150,000 from the very neighbors she was fining for having their grass a quarter-inch too long. The trial was less of a legal battle and more of a public roasting. I remember sitting in the courtroom, Sarah holding my hand, watching Linda's defense attorney try to paint her as a concerned community leader who just got carried away. But the evidence was a mount in the video from Mrs. Higgins, the fingerprints on the baggie, the bank statements, the testimony from Biff and Gary, who flipped on her faster than a pancake at a diner. When the judge asked Linda if she had anything to say before sentencing, she stood up, wearing this drab grey sweater that looked all wrong on her, and for a second, I thought she might apologize. I thought maybe the months in holding had humbled her. But people like Linda, they don't change. They just recalibrate their delusions. I was trying to keep the property values up, she sniffed, glaring at the jury. I was the only one who cared about standards. Without me, Willow Creek will be a slum. The judge, a no-nonsense woman who looked like she'd heard every excuse in the book, just took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Mrs. Prentice, the judge said, you didn't protect your community, you preyed on it. You weaponized authority to feed your own ego and line your own pockets, and frankly, society needs a break from you. 12 years? She got 12 years for conspiracy, fraud, assault, and attempting to frame a federal officer. And as the bailiff led her away, she didn't look at me. She didn't look at the neighbors who had packed the gallery. She just stared straight ahead, clinging to whatever shred of self-importance she had left the day after the verdict. I was out on my front porch, finally having the coffee I'd promised myself months ago. The orange cones were gone. The drone was gone, and across the street, the new HOA board, which was just a group of 3 dads who mostly wanted to make sure the pool stayed clean, had sent out a letter abolishing almost all of Linda's insane rules. I watched Sarah in the front yard, replanting those blue hydrangeas, digging into the earth with this look of pure peace on her face. And I realized that justice isn't just about punishing the bad guys. It's about clearing the weeds so the good stuff can grow back. Neighbors were walking by, actually waving, stopping to chat without looking over their shoulders to see if they were being watched. A kid was riding his bike on the sidewalk, leaving skid marks. And nobody screamed at him. It was imperfect, it was messy, and it was beautiful. I still work the high-level threats. I still deal with terrorists and cyber attacks. But every time I come home to Willow Creek, I'm reminded that the biggest battles aren't always fought in war rooms or dark alleys. Sometimes they're fought right in your own driveway against the petty tyrants who think a little bit of power gives them the right to own you. And look, I know not everyone has a federal badge in their back pocket to drop like a nuclear bomb when a Karen comes knocking. I know most of you have to deal with your bosses or your landlords or your own Lindas with nothing but your patience and your grit. But if there's one thing I want you to take away from this crazy ride, it's this. Bullies are terrified of the truth. They thrive on silence. They thrive on you being too polite to make a scene. But the moment you stand your ground, the moment you let the light in, their power dissolves like sugar in hot water. So, I'm curious, and I really want to know, have you ever had a Linda? Have you ever had someone try to wreck your life just because they needed to feel big? Tell me your story in the comments. Let's hear it out. Because the more we talk about it, the less power they have. Stay safe out there. Watch your 6 and remember, peace is worth fighting for, even if you have to call in the cavalry to get it.